Welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. In today's episode of We Rise Fighting, Brian will bring us the Labor and Palestine report, and he will also report back from the No Nazis in Wisconsin rally, which took place on February 10th. On my end, I share an article that covers highlights from some key U.S. strikes as well as strike figures, and then Brian closes it out with how workers at Planned Parenthood in Wisconsin voted to unionize recently. Tonight's music is the hip-hop group Rebel Diaz performing their answer to Which Side Are You On?, which is a traditional labor folk song. So here's some Rebel Diaz for you, and then we'll get straight to the Labor and Palestine report.
Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my Lord? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my Lord?
See, before I draw the line, let me welcome you close to all the folks who knew Obama sold the people a hoax. Gave the money to suckers while our community's still poor. Withdrew the troops but started another war. Colonizing, terrorizing, creating the oil crisis so they can make a kill on no food and gas prices. Prisons is filling, they trying to lock up the future. Militarized borders and control of computers. Want a stupid bumping music that ain't healthy for the shortest. Privatizing schools and policemen in the hallways. Can't be dormant, I'm awoke and rise up, be ready. Brought the family with us and we hold the machetes.
Riding the fence, too many people be riding the fence. Yeah, you say you ready for war, but are you convinced? I'm not convinced. If you're a rider, freedom fighter, crowd excited, then let's do this. We can make one big united, middle finger to the U.S. Give me the bravest and the truest, fuck the hippest and the coolest. We gon' spark this revolution and cross this off our to-do list. Put your foot down if you look down on this criminal system. Put your book down and get shook down like my niggas in prison. Don't be condemning and condoning their actions in one sentence. Make up your mind, choose your side. Is you a patriot or a menace to society? So riot or sit by quietly, but don't pull out your flag and try to say you gon' ride with me. You flip-flopping like hip-hop, I don't get locked in that trick box. Get got like Big and Pop, shit's got to stop. I am the people, not the big, I repeat after Fred. So please blow my brains out if I ever forget.
I'm with the independent thinkers, I'm down with the movers and the shakers and the ex-Henny drinkers, the non-smokers, the health advocates, the non-voters, the young bloods in the hood training like soldiers. I'm on the side of the tracks with the hood gardens, the little child that don't color inside the margins. I don't ride the fence, I cultivate my strength, cause if it ain't about power, it don't make sense. I've been down with Boogie Down since BDP, some Brown Pride, and Black Power make RBG. A OG told me choose battles wisely. In the struggle, don't forget your children and your wifey. If you don't see me on the podium preaching it, every day I hope my every action is teaching it. Cause revolution is a process, it's not a speech or a panel. Don't bite off more than you can handle.
Rock hard like slingshots in Palestina. Con todos los estudiantes por educación gratuita. I'm with workers uprising and the right to unionize. We ain't crossed the border, so you better legalize. I'm with La Peña del Bronx. I'm still with Victor Toro, cause gentrification is polluting my borough. So bro never, South Bronx forever. Decolonize the block, make your neighborhood better. I ain't down with the rich, I'm more Richie Perez. Don't talk to grand juries or cooperate with feds. I'm with students, doctors, janitors, teachers. We need living wages, but they don't believe us. Monida, Barretto, Spofford, Hunts Point, my hood, I love. We join forces, forming our deck, BX. Taking over buildings, Rebel Diaz for the children.
Politics to sickness, streets express symptoms. Caught up with a quickness, big business pimps them. Scholars play the simpleton, fools play with wisdom. Who will stand and fight back? Who will play the victim? Trials and tribulations, injured generations, stolen history and outsourced innovation. Babel Tower fell, tribes are at war. The battle story's not represented in the score. The game's fixed, most of the faces and names switched. Credit stolen for art, science, religion, language, technology, philosophy, and with strangers. They paid in hatred for the knowledge of the ancients. Power in words, actions, guns, swords. Aim Panthers, brown berets, young lords. Pick a side, one sickness, one cure, one love, one blood, one world, but one war.
Hello, listeners. We're going to start off our show like we have for weeks now on Palestine and labor. Laborforpalestine.net has a variety of information at their website, including resolutions and information and protest and other kinds of information related to labor in Palestine and the U.S. Domestically, as well as wider North America and around the world. We like to highlight some events as well, besides the resolutions that might have been passed. One of those is the Genocidal Israeli War Against Palestine Labor Forum event at the International Longshore Warehouse Workers Union on the West Coast. At 12 noon on Saturday, February 24th, at 400 North Point Street in San Francisco, there will be an event called the Genocidal Israeli War Against Palestine, sponsored by ILWU Local 10, which has a rich history of shutting down the docks in support of international and other actions. We have had Brother Clarence Thomas on the show to discuss some of those, and this is in line with that spirit. So speakers will include a variety of Palestinian, Black speakers, workers, of course, and many others, including Brother Clarence Thomas. So once again, this is at the ILWU Local 10 and 400 North Point Street in San Francisco on 12 noon, Saturday, February 24th. And the title of the forum is The Genocidal Israeli War Against Palestine. We encourage listeners to check that event out. In tandem with this, on the East Coast, educators marched in Washington, D.C. on February 10th. Their demand was to revoke largest labor union's endorsement of Biden amid genocide in Gaza. This is put on by the Educators for Palestine. The largest labor union they are talking about is the NEA, the National Education Association. This included Palestinian and Jewish educators, as well as members from both the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, and the NEA, that strongly believe in the need for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the current genocidal actions that Israel has inflicted upon the people of Palestine, with U.S. backing, of course. Union solidarity was present with members from SEIU, Local 500, and UAW's Labor for Palestine. There was union members from across the country there, and that have been pushing and passing and protesting and demanding ceasefire resolutions, among other things, in their union locals, and to canceling their donations to the NEA PAC until the group's demands are met. The group Educators for Palestine put out a release for this, and in that, which is available at laborforpalestine.net, they had some quotes from teachers on why they're putting forth their demands. Quote, I'm Palestinian, I'm a dues-paying union member. It is unconscionable for my union to stand behind the politician who is funding the genocide of my people. Rahaf Othman, IEA, NEA, Oak Lawn, Illinois. Quote, as educators, we are committed to the well-being of children. How can we sit idly while we watch thousands of children being killed by Israel, their schools destroyed, and their families displaced? We want our union to live up to its values by letting President Biden know that we expect better from our country. And since he is not listening, we have to use our endorsement as leverage to show we are serious. Stephen Siegel, OEA, NEA in Portland, Oregon. And Nicole Morse, an NEA AFT member from West Palm Beach, Florida, stated, quote, "I'm a Jewish educator who has been seeking support from my union because my employer has tried to discipline me over my advocacy for my Palestinian students. It makes no sense for that same union to endorse a politician like Biden who describes Palestine solidarity activists like me as dangerous." The NEA petition to revoke Biden endorsement can be accessed at laborforpalestine.net, and there will be continuing actions from educators as we move forward. In another development in education, there are many students and faculty and others on campuses, workers, under attack for their solidarity with Palestine. In New York City, 1,000 people came to New York City's Washington Square Park in Lower Manhattan on February 8th to show their solidarity with Palestine. All students and Youth for Gaza was the rally's call. Many were college students under attack for protesting the slaughter of 30,000 Palestinians. All their older folks also came. Hundreds of Palestinian flags were flown, accompanied by many signs. This was reported in strugglelalucha.org. And we're seeing across the country, we've discussed this a bit on the show, listeners, that campus administrations are using Palestine to attack shared governance, unions, and student rights on campuses in many locations, purposely confusing or conflating the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Okay, so the next item we have here, listeners, is yesterday in Madison, Wisconsin. There was a rally that sent a clear message: no Nazis in Wisconsin, free Palestine, and build people's power. We reported on this last week, and Rick, you had some comments about this regarding the event. You weren't there, but definitely paying attention and watching it closely and helping assist in organizing this event, which We Rise Fighting Labor podcast supported, as well as Wisconsin Bail Out the People movement, People's Unity Coalition, and the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine, and was supported by a variety of other labor and community organizations. So, Rick, what's your thoughts on this event yesterday in Madison?
You know, Brian, you sent me some pictures, and also we had a little bit of conversation before we jumped on and started recording. I think one of the key points that you made before we started recording, Brian, was the fact that Wisconsin could get to that point where Nazis could march down the street freely, display a swastika on campus. The fact that Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, progressive, with such a progressive labor history, could get to that point, I think was in and of itself, problematic and an indication of where some of our consciousness is at. We've talked about it on this show, and we also just talked about it right before hopping on. We were talking about Richard Spence and the college tour that he made, like 5-6 years ago, which for the listeners who aren't familiar, Richard Spence is because he's still alive, this clean-cut neo-Nazi guy who basically got microphone after microphone. He went on a college speaking tour, and the organizers of the college or whatever campuses allowed him on campus to speak would do so and justify it by saying that democracy is made up of a marketplace of ideas. And Richard Spence was just one of those ideas, and we need to confront those. And we disagree with that. This is an ideology: fascism, neo-Nazism, white supremacy. These are ideologies that are based on, that are rooted on, whose foundation is ethnic cleansing and genocide. When you shake it down all the way, when you boil down the ideas all the way, that's what it comes down to. For that reason, there is no discussion. For that reason, there is no debate. If your ideology contains ideas of ethnic cleansing and genocide, there's no need for debate. And that's what neo-Nazis believe. That's what white supremacists believe. And they marched through Madison. So the fact that it could get to that point, number one, was one highlight that I wanted to make on this show. And the second one was that it went answered. It went answered. In other words, that's what this event was. It was an answer to that, and I'm thankful for that. And I hope this grows, and I hope it inspires other people to do the same. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad February 10th happened in Madison. So, Yeah, so Brian, you shared some of the pictures. You told me a little bit about the event. Um, one of the ideas that we were bouncing back and forth on this show is how do you combat fascism? How do you combat this ideology rooted in extreme nationalism and militarization and ethnic cleansing and authoritarianism and the smashing of workers' organizations? How do you combat this ideology? We've talked about creating a united front, organizing a united front. So, Brian, what would that look like, and how does something like that happen?
Well, Rick, for listeners, take a step back and then go forward, more directly answer your question. So, for listeners that aren't familiar with what took place, we did mention this on the show previously, but there's this group called the so-called Nazi Blood Tribe, and their first major action in Wisconsin was last summer to menace a pride event in a city called Watertown, Wisconsin. And this is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender and queer pride event. And they went out there in full regalia with swastika regalia and flags. And they were protested a bit, but there was no street action to protest them. And at that event, they literally called for the lynching of LGBTQ people as well as others. And then they proceeded to escalate and go to Madison on November 18th and start at Library Mall, march up State Street to the state capitol to attempt to recruit. Now, for listeners that might not be familiar with Madison, Wisconsin, for 100 years, this location, Library Mall, all the way up State Street to the Capitol, has been a student and worker center. Indigenous rights have been fought for there, and many, many other struggles. And of course, we know in the 60s and 70s, UW-Madison was a stronghold for the anti-Vietnam War movement, and many collective bargaining struggles were won. The first teaching assistants union was won in Madison, and many, many other firsts for our working class there, and also for people of color. And so to have the Nazis march in that type of a location, with Madison being world renowned for progressive and revolutionary thought and actions for this long of a period, was an extreme affront to our class. Then, on January 21st, the same Nazi blood tribe, they call themselves, projected a swastika onto a dorm building at UW-Whitewater, which meant that they had to go into the back parking lot and go onto the property to do that, which is extreme escalation, putting many students and workers in harm on that campus. And that particular town, Whitewater, is there's been a variety of migrants that have moved there, primarily from Central America, but also from Mexico in the recent period. And the week before this incident happened, there was a large article in the largest state newspaper, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And we went there the week after to distribute leaflets for the February 10th rally, and we received a strong response, positive response from the migrants in that community, and they were in solidarity with our action on February 10th and happy that it was taking place. So to answer your question, Rick, this is how we do it. We have to unite every sector of the working class, as we try and attempt to do on here at We Rise Fighting. And that's what we saw on February 10th. We were intentional about uniting every sector of our class. It has to be done generally, even in a state with strong unions. We know that even with the strongest union by itself cannot defeat fascism and cannot advance the way we need to now in this period of time in history. So we invited union members to this event. AFSCME Local 1 had a speaker at the rally. We had Palestinian speakers, speakers from Central America, Honduran speaker, a speaker that was indigenous and Mexican, and union speakers from a variety of different places, and students and youth. And it was fundamentally centered in the workers' struggle, because we know to shut down genocidal apartheid in Palestine, as we always talk about here with the Palestinian updates in our discussions, that the shut that down, it's going to take workers to stop making the bombs, and the workers to stop the ships, and the workers to engage in direct action strikes or whatever type of form that will take in Palestine. The Palestinian trade unions put out a call in October that we've been following with zeal here on We Rise Fighting to support them, to uplift the Palestinian union struggle and workers' struggle. So that's what it'll take there. And in the United States here, and really anywhere, as we've seen, where fascism has been defeated, it can only be done broadly through a broad-based People's United Front type of movement. And that's what we tried and attempted to do yesterday, February 10th, and we think we were successful. We had thousands of leaflets that were distributed across the state. We went to the streets, we talked to folks, we sent emails, we talked to people on the phone, and we got the word out. And we understand that this might be the beginning for many folks. Maybe folks don't have historical understanding of what Nazis or other fascists are, but in particular Nazis, looking at their history, since this was a Nazi blood tribe, we were clear to say that the first thing, for example, that happened when Hitler took power in Germany in 33, in the spring of 33, was to make unions illegal and to send communist, socialist, and union members to Dachau that spring. And many of them happen to be, of course, Jewish and gay communist, socialists, or union leaders. The reason that was done is because to put forward a Nazi project in Germany, the Nazis and their industrial capitalist backers needed to get rid of working class organization and unions. So that's why we were so intent on February 10th to bring in workers and the union struggle, because we need everyone, but especially union workers, because we have working class organization, we have union halls, we have resources to defeat the fascists, not only in the streets, but also organizationally in workplaces and in our communities. Not that that can't be done otherwise, but unions have the resources at their disposal much more immediately than, for example, maybe a community organization or a neighborhood block club that's forming. We need that too. So Rick, yesterday, that's why we had our slogans and our banners out there. And you mentioned, I believe you had some comments about that as well, that what we just stated here was another reason why we had the slogans and the banners we did. The Palestinians have always been clear that the struggle is international and in many different dimensions. We're seeing that in this country, where the Palestinian struggle is in many different levels, similar to the Black liberation struggle. So that was represented through our banners and our placards yesterday as well, and our speakers and many other ways. So do you have any comments on, I think we'll end it here, Rick, with your comment about some of the developments that you saw in the speeches yesterday, or the messaging that was on the street that we took there yesterday.
Yeah, Brian, you sent me some of the pictures of the event, and I was definitely struck by some of the placards and some of the banners. I thought they were on point. All right, and I would just like to read some of those placards and banners to our listeners. One of them reads as follows: "Bigotry hurts all working people." Another one reads, "Fight capitalism, not migrants." Another one reads, "Stop the hate. Bigotry hurts all poor and working people." Still another one, "Stop the U.S.-Israel attack on Gaza. Palestine will be free." Workers for Palestine. No Nazis in Wisconsin. I think these are on point. I think they're direct. Free Palestine from the river to the sea. That's what's up. Yeah, no, I think these are direct. I think these are on point. And as I was expressing to you before we started recording, Brian, I'm so happy that that's the kind of message that came out of this event, because all too often you're hearing stuff like humanitarian crisis in Gaza and they need humanitarian aid. And as I was commenting to you before we started recording, a humanitarian crisis can be war, a humanitarian crisis can be genocide, but a humanitarian crisis could also be an earthquake, can be a tsunami, it could be a natural disaster, something like that. And so humanitarian crisis doesn't tell us enough. But when you speak of genocide, then then there is a victim and there is an oppressor. There's someone who's carrying out the genocide. And so I think that these placards help clarify all of that, rather than just make it sound like some humanitarian crisis that, if I put $5 in the charity box, it'll help. I think that these types of placards that bring home ideas of, for instance, internationalism and international solidarity, I think those are those really get people thinking as far as solidarity and class consciousness and connecting these dots rather than something like, they need humanitarian aid, which they do, don't get me wrong. But when you turn this issue into a humanitarian crisis kind of issue, I think it begs more questions than it answers. So I really do appreciate the placards and the banners. Kudos to you and other organizers and the other activists who helped make all of that happen and get those together. Those are really good, and I hope that people take note of those types of things. I hope that more events like this happen and that it inspires other groups to do the same around the US because this fascist menace is on the rise and it has been on the rise. So we need to respond. Part of what I was saying to you again before we started recording today, Brian, was what if the unions jumped on board with all of this, with being anti-fascist for the reasons that you just listed? Under Nazi Germany, one of the first things to go were the workers' organizations and the unions. And we're carrying that history and we know it. So what would happen if our union leaders took anti-fascist stance, as the brother and sister from Vermont did, that we had on the show? What if they took anti-fascist stances? What if they took just very overt pro-Palestinian solidarity stances? Rather than these lukewarm, we condemn Hamas and at the same time want humanitarian. No, man, that's weak sauce. So I'm glad the placards and the banners read as they did. I have to tip my hat to you and the organizers of this event for that. So thank you, Brian, for the Palestinian report. Now moving on to this week's labor report, there's going to be one quick mention that I think is important for mentioning in the labor movement these days. Mary Kay Henry, the president of the Service Employees International Union, is stepping down. She won't be running for re-election. I'm going to leave it at that. I think that by itself is newsworthy enough. What I would like to cover in greater depth is an article that I caught in nerdwallet.com. And the title of the article, and I do encourage our listeners to check out this article if you really want to dig deeper into it. The title of the article is Vegas Casino Strike Averted Ahead of Super Bowl. Who's on strike in the US is the name of the article. And it was written, looks like it was last updated February 7th. And I really like this article because, we've shared articles like this in the past as far as, the general landscape of what's going on in labor right now. And I think this article does a pretty good job of summarizing what's going on in labor right now. I definitely took chunks of it out, mostly chunks that we have covered here in depth already. So when they were talking about SAG-AFTRA, took that part of the article out. When they were talking about the UAW strike, the United Auto Workers strike, I took that part out and just kept made it a little bit shorter. So this article has a few sections, and it starts off like this. As of February 7th, there have been 20 labor actions in the U.S. in 36 locations in 2024, according to the Labor Action Tracker. Recent strikes are part of a larger trend of increasing strikes over the last couple of years. Strikes increased 50% in 2022 compared to 2021, Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows. The number of workers involved in a work stoppage was nearly identical in 2022 as it was in 2023, 424 and 423 respectively, according to the Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations Labor Action Tracker. Going on strike means workers withhold labor from their employer in order to gain leverage to bargain for things like higher compensation and benefits, more protection, as well as improved working conditions. Workers don't have to be part of a union to strike, but unions often organize and authorize strikes, as well as represent workers in negotiations. More strikes are expected in the days to come. Here are some of the new and ongoing major strikes happening right now in the US. So we'll start with the ongoing strikes. Ongoing strike is Unite Here, Local 11. There's 15,000 participants, all hotel workers. It started on July 20th, and what's happening is this. Strikes at multiple hotels in Los Angeles by members of Unite Here Local 11. The union is bargaining with the Coordinated Bargaining Group, which I take to be a group of hotel chain owners and representatives of the company. What do workers want? Higher wages, better benefits, and improved working conditions, and permanent jobs for replacement workers. Strike update. As of January 25th, striking workers reached deals with 29 hotels in Los Angeles. That leaves 33 remaining area hotels with workers in contract negotiations. Okay, moving on to the next section titled Media Company Strikes in 2024. Workers at multiple media companies nationwide have walked off the job for one-day strikes since the start of the year. Here's what went down. February 1st, 230 members of the News Guild CWA walked out of newsrooms owned by Alden Global Capital, a hedge fund, for one day in protest of layoffs and stalled contract negotiations. Union workers comprise 7 newsrooms across the country, including Allentown, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Orlando, and Norfolk, Virginia. The workers want pay increases, retirement benefit protection, and a substantial effort to address racial and gender pay disparities. On January 25th, dozens of union workers at the New York Daily News walked out in protest of staff cutting measures by the company and stalled contract negotiations. On January 25th, and we reported on this, on January 25th, workers at Forbes staged the first ever strike in the business publication. This is Forbes magazine. The strike, which lasted 3 days, was in protest of impassive contract bargaining. On January 24th, workers with the San Antonio Report Union walked out in protest of the layoff of an editor. The union also filed an unfair labor practice complaint against the company. And you know what? I would like to highlight that real quick. I would just like to talk about what an unfair labor practice is. So, an unfair labor practice is a violation of labor law as it relates to union organizing and union activities. Yeah, labor law as it relates to that. And I've been on the show talking several times about how unions have to jump through several hoops, go through red tape in order to just go on strike. Now, this is one of those things that I'm talking about is usually when a union wants to go on strike, they have to prove that the employer is guilty of an unfair labor practice, something that justifies the workers going on strike. So that's what this is that's what this is mentioning. The union also filed an unfair labor practice complaint against the company. So just wanted to talk about that real quick and, offer that knowledge for people who may be unfamiliar. Moving along. On January 23rd, more than 400 unionized workers across 11 publications owned by Condé Nast walked out. Workers were protesting a standstill in contract bargaining. The article goes on to mention other short-lived strikes, and it mentions SEIU, Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West with Prime Healthcare. The participants were 1,800 healthcare workers. The strike started December 20th of 2023 and ended December 26th of 2023. And the article talks about what's happening. It says, workers at 4 Prime healthcare facilities in Southern California launched a 7-day strike on December 20th. The workers include emergency room technicians, licensed vocational nurses, certified nursing assistants, radiology technicians, medical assistants, respiratory technicians, and more. The strike ended on December 20th. The facilities include Prime St. Francis Medical Center in Linwood, Prime Centinela Medical Center in Inglewood, Prime Encino Medical Center in Encino, Prime Garden Grove Hospital Medical Center in Garden Grove. The strike is the second strike at Prime healthcare facilities in Southern California. In October, members of SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, went on a 5-day strike. What workers want: higher wages, improved healthcare plans, and better benefits. They also want the facilities to address understaffing, worker turnover, and patient care concerns. Now, you know what? I'm going to pause there for a second, and at this point, just reflect on what the demands of these workers have been across the board in each one of these strikes has been increased pay, better health benefits, things like that, better workplace protections. And I just want to mention that to help start to do away with some of these anti-union narratives that say that, oh, these workers are so greedy and they want everything under the... No, they just want to be able to survive. They just want to be able to live, to afford for their families, put food on the table, pay the skyrocketing rent, pay for the skyrocketing costs of food and utilities and things like that. So that's why these workers are demanding those things. And I really wanted to highlight that because that narrative, the quote unquote greedy union workers narrative, is one that really bothers me. So just wanted to highlight that. This article continues and starts talking about the teacher strike that we've been reporting on. Teacher strike breaks record in Boston suburb is the name of this subsection. And again, this section is called Other Short-Lived Strikes. So again, this is a subsection, teacher strike breaks record in Boston suburb. And I'm not sure what it means by breaks records in the Boston suburbs, because we have been reporting on this strike. This is the Newton teacher strike, which was an illegal strike. So maybe it broke the law and not records, or maybe it did break records, but it definitely broke the law. And that's why it's gotten so much attention from us, because we feel that there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge that can be learned from illegal strikes in the US. We feel that these are particularly instructive, in part because they speak to the current state of our labor laws and everything that is illegal under labor law. A lot of things are illegal under labor law. And so what we argue here is that illegal strikes are either justified or there's just no other way to do it. And they're also very inspiring. But anyway, this section of this article reads as follows. Teachers in Newton Public Schools, a district in a Boston suburb, went on strike for 11 school days beginning on January 19th. The strike included 1,900 members of the Newton Teachers Association who were locked in negotiations with the school district. The teachers bargained for increased pay, added parental leave, and more social workers in schools. Again, this is the stuff that they're fighting for. Increased pay, added parental leave, and more social workers in schools. Listen to that. Please don't fall for this narrative that union workers are just greedy and they strike because they're greedy. No, these are the types of demands that they're making. The article continues. Strikes by public employees are illegal in Massachusetts, and the union was fined more than $500,000 for the strike. 2 lawsuits were also filed on behalf of parents who want their children back to school. The strike finally broke, and students returned to school on Monday, February 5th. This article continues to another section called Possible Strikes to Come. And, well, the word strikes is plural, but they only list one strike here. And that is of the Association of Professional Flight Attendants. And the potential participants in this strike is more than 26,000 flight attendants. And the article asks, what's happening? On August 30th, members of the Association of Professional Flight Attendants voted yes to authorize the strike on behalf of the American Airlines flight attendants. The APFA national president, Julie Hedrick, said the union is, quote unquote, fired up and ready for a contract, adding that American Airlines may, quote unquote, ignore this strike vote at their peril. But don't expect a strike soon. It takes a long time and a lot of red tape for airline unions to legally strike and could even be blocked by the federal government. But voting to authorize a strike still puts pressure on American Airlines to negotiate. What do workers want? Again, workers want, increased payment amounts and payment for boarding time, increased profit sharing, benefits like parking reimbursement and additional vacation time, and an improved retirement plan. Yeah, I could certainly understand that. To the best of my knowledge, flight attendants across the airline industry actually don't get paid until the door closes behind them and all the passengers are fully boarded. Everything that happens before that, as far as waiting to be called onto a flight, arriving at the airport, waiting around the airport, stuff like that, is unpaid time. So flight attendants, from the best of my knowledge, don't get paid until that door closes behind them on the airplane. Again, the article continues. How many strikes happened in 2022? Now, this is actually my favorite part of the article because of some of the findings that they offer. Yeah, let me go ahead and read what we have here, and then I'll highlight the parts that I want to highlight. Here are some of the key findings from the 2022 Labor Action Report from Cornell Industrial Relations Center. There were 424 work stoppages in 2022, including 417 strikes and 7 lockouts. In total, approximately 224,000 workers were involved in these work stoppages. Work stoppages increased by 52% from 2021 to 2022. The number of workers involved in work stoppages increased by 60% from 2021 to 2022. Most work stoppages lasted a short period of time. 46% lasted 1 day or less. So we're talking about very short strikes here. Now, this is the part that I really wanted to get at. I found this number really compelling. And if you take nothing else away from this article, there's this. Non-union workers organized 32% of all strikes in 2022. 32%, that's a third of all strikes were organized by non-union workers. I think that's a very telling number. I think that if I ever find another number like that, I will be sharing it here on the show again, but that's something definitely to take a note of. And finally, the article sums it up or wraps things up with the following. The majority of work stoppages in 2022 were in the accommodation and food services industry, about 1/3 of all stoppages. But these stoppages were composed of 7,000 workers, which accounts for only 3% of total workers involved in stoppages for the year. The majority of accommodation and food services workers were led by Starbucks Workers United, an organizing effort to unionize Starbucks locations, or the Fight for 15 campaign, an organizing effort to unionize underpaid workers and secure a $15 minimum wage. The majority of workers, about 60% involved in all work stoppages during 2022, were in the education services field, something that we had actually shared on this show before. I think a lot of these work stoppages are happening in education and healthcare. And we have talked about that. So, yeah, that's the findings in this article. Again, the name of the article is Vegas Casino Strike Averted Ahead of Super Bowl. Who's on strike in the US? And you can find that on nerdwallet.com. It was last updated on February 7th. Some useful information there. Again, I'm walking away with that number that says that 1/3 of all strikes were organized by non-union workers. I think that tells us a lot. I think that tells us the amount of class anger that's starting to brew and bubble in the U.S. working class. Those tensions are starting to run higher and higher, and workers either aren't going to wait to organize a union, or a union just doesn't represent them, or whatever the case may be. But non-union workers calling on strike, organizing a strike, I find that very inspiring. And if we find articles that speak more about that, we will certainly have them on this show. So, Brian, you want to wrap up the show for us tonight?
All right, thanks, Rick. Yes, and another factor that we find in our organizing, my day job is organizer in healthcare and education, that the COVID pandemic, many workers are very extremely angry, taught that they were essential workers and lied to. And there are millions of workers out there that are not going to be had and are moving forward. And some of those here are in Wisconsin, which Planned Parenthood workers have voted to unionize. And the ballots tallied last Thursday morning at the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board office in Milwaukee, were 56 to 13 in favor of joining the Wisconsin Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals, Local 5000. WFN HP, part of the American Federation of Teachers Healthcare Division, represents nurses, clinical lab scientists, and other healthcare workers at health systems throughout the state. Quote, with the care of employees and patients at the center of our collective work, we intend to build a good working relationship as we navigate the next steps together in support of our employees, said Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin President Tanya Atkinson and WFN HP President Connie Smith in a joint statement Thursday night. And listeners will remember we did interview Sister Connie Smith a few months ago. We thank employees for voting and look forward to bargaining in good faith to ensure Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin continues to provide excellent patient care. Dahlia, a healthcare assistant at Planned Parenthood's Madison clinic, said the day before the tally, we're looking forward to having a seat at the table with management in decisions that affect our day-to-day clinic lives. Citing safety concerns tied to the political controversy surrounding abortion, workers gave only their first names. Dahlia continued, myself and all my coworkers are very passionate about the work that we do, but we also get burned out really easily. We're hoping this is a step in the right direction so we can continue to provide patient care while also creating a really positive work environment. And Jamie Lucas, executive director of the union, says a union contract would enshrine clinic policies and procedures and make them legally enforceable. Quote, the workers organized because they believe in the mission of Planned Parenthood and they want to make it a long-term sustainable and viable organization, said Lucas. So we wish those workers well as they move forward to bargain their first contract, in solidarity with the healthcare workers there at the Planned Parenthood clinics in Wisconsin. And this article that we quoted from was from the Madison Capital Times. And listeners can also go to the Wisconsin Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals to find more information. It's Local 5000, and find photos and videos of their campaign. And there'll be more upcoming information as they move toward bargaining their first contract. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for listening always. You know, we are the podcast you listen to, hopefully before you walk into your union meeting, when you're organizing with your fellow workers on the shop floor. You know, this is the podcast that asks questions that other labor podcasts don't ask, you know, and I can say that with confidence because I've checked out many other labor podcasts. And yes, this one is unique. You know, this one asks questions like, what would a democratic labor movement look like? What would a militant labor movement look like? You know, why aren't we seeing and supporting more illegal strikes here in the US? You know, what would a democratic union that upheld the principles that we need to create a better and more just world for all, what would a union like that look like? You know, that's the type of questions that we're asking on here. You know, we're also connecting all this stuff to the international struggle, connecting this stuff certainly to Palestine, asking questions like, you know, what if our union leaders took a pro-Palestine stance in solidarity with the Palestinian people and didn't water that message down by saying we first quote unquote condemn Hamas? You know, what would that look like? And who would it inspire? You know, because there's a whole new generation of younger workers looking for answers, looking to channel their class anger, looking to channel their activist energy into something, and it could be unions. You know, what if our union leaders took an anti-fascist stance at a critical time right now in history when we've already been taught through the experience of Germany and many other nations that the first organizations to go under fascism are workers' organizations, unions. So what if our labor leaders took on anti-fascist stances and pro-Palestinian stances and upheld the principles of a democratic and militant labor movement here in the U.S., fighting for the rights and for the benefit of the entire U.S. working class. What would that look like? So that's what this show is about. We hope to bring you content that speaks to this sort of thing, these sorts of ideas. If you like what you're hearing on here, if you benefit from what you're hearing on here, if you find value in what you're hearing on here, please subscribe, like, share, talk about, do all the things. But for now, we thank you for listening. Thank you always for listening. Love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone.